Dear listeners, welcome to a breathtaking, nerve-wracking report from the glowing battlefields of the East. Imagine this, in the icy winds of January 2026, amidst the furrowed landscapes of the eastern Ukrainian front, a drama of unimaginable cruelty and tactical brilliance unfolds. More than a dozen Russian soldiers, yes, you heard correctly, over a dozen, are eliminated in a single lightning-fast window of time, while their armored reinforcements, those alleged bulwarks of steel and fire, are damaged under the merciless pressure of Ukrainian drones or pushed back in panicked flight. The FPV drones, those nimble hunters of the sky, no longer strike only at exposed infantry. No, they now hunt entire defense systems, from the trembling soldiers in the trenches to the roaring tanks and armored vehicles desperately rolling forward to stabilize the line. What a spectacle of hatred, revenge, and technological superiority. The Russian army, once feared as invincible, is turned here into a ridiculous shadow of itself, shredded by invisible enemies from the air. While Russian troops desperately try to reinforce their positions in the first weeks of January 2026, after days of bitter fighting, Ukrainian drones appear in the sky with deadly precision. Infantry units are driven from their hiding places, hunted like rats from a hole, and the advancing armored vehicles, which are supposed to offer support, are suddenly spotted from above and shrouded in a chaos of explosions and smoke. Within a few minutes, imagine the panic, the movement comes to a standstill. Formations collapse like a house of cards in a storm, and the momentum of the Russian advance breaks down before it has even truly begun. The Ukrainians, those undaunted fighters for freedom and homeland, turn the tables. Their drones are no longer mere nuisances, but an active layer of attack that takes soldiers, vehicles, and the entire flow of command under fire simultaneously. When infantrymen can no longer hide anywhere and armored support can no longer move forward safely, the entire Russian defensive framework cracks like a rotten tree in a thunderstorm. Oh, how pathetic the Russian army appears here. A colossus on feet of clay trembling under the hum of the drones. These attacks reveal the dramatic shift on the battlefield, a shift that must drive the Russian generals into madness. FPV drones are no longer simple tools of harassment, no side weapons in a larger game. No, they have become a dominant force that besets the enemy from all sides. Imagine the scene in the cold nights of January 2026, where breath freezes to ice. Russian soldiers in their trenches become hostages of their own fear. The drones appear in short cycles, strike, disappear like ghosts, and return to keep the Russians in constant uncertainty. When is the next strike coming? Who survives this hell? The Ukrainian FPV teams concentrate on trenches, shallow dugouts, and temporary combat positions in a contested sector of eastern Ukraine. And the pattern is no coincidence, it is calculated, diabolically precise. The drones do not appear arbitrarily, but with a timing that drives the Russians into madness, eats away at their morale, and thins their ranks. The attacks do not aim to capture ground immediately. Why bother when you can wear the enemy down slowly and agonizingly? Instead, they weaken the ability to hold ground over time. Repeated explosions damage trenches, cause sections to collapse, and force soldiers to change positions under extreme stress. Every movement in the trench increases exposure. Every hesitation invites a drone to dive down from above. Video material released by Ukrainian UAV units, and oh how shocking it is, shows drones diving directly into trench corners and shallow bunkers where the blast pressure has nowhere to escape. Russian soldiers who stay still risk being buried alive or shredded. Those who flee are immediately spotted and hunted like game. This creates a narrow palette of bad choices. Stay or move, both carry deadly risk. And this balance gradually drains concentration and discipline. As the strikes continue, the trench line loses its shape because damaged sections drive units apart and interrupt visual contact. Communication within the position becomes more difficult as shouting or moving along the trench increases exposure, a perfect recipe for chaos and betrayal among the Russians. Over time, small gaps emerge not through a dramatic breakthrough, but because the line as a unified defense system becomes increasingly difficult to manage. The frequency of these FPV attacks is the key. It leaves no room for recovery. No long breaks to repair cover, reorganize squads, or push supplies forward. Even when no explosion sounds, the hum of the drones above their heads keeps the soldiers awake and tense, slowing down basic tasks and accumulating errors. Fatigue builds up at a racing pace, and vigilance drops exactly at the most fatal moments. Footage from the area shows how quickly a trench is transformed into a trap as soon as drones take control. A position that might hold off small arms fire offers only limited protection against a precise dive attack. Earth walls and wooden supports fail after repeated hits, and shallow roofs do not stop shrapnel. The trench still exists, but its value as a shield dwindles with every strike, a slow, agonizing death for the Russian defense. This phase of the fight sets the tone for everything that follows, as it defines the battle as one of attrition, not of rapid advance. The pressure does not seek a dramatic collapse in a single moment. It aims to grind down the ability to stay in place until holding the line becomes more dangerous than abandoning it. From the opening strikes on the battlefield is shaped around the exhaustion of the defender, not around rushing past him. This explains why FPV drones return again and again to the same trench systems, and why the focus is initially on infantry positions before anything else unfolds. The timing of these FPV strikes is crucial, as they hit Russian forces exactly when the defense is most fragile. After days of heavy fighting in the bitter cold days of January 2026, Russian units try to repair trenches, rotate exhausted soldiers, and restore basic order along the line. But suddenly, without warning, FPV drones appear in the sky and transform routine defensive work into a sudden crisis that shatters rhythm and focus. When drones enter the airspace during reorganization, the defensive structure loses its coherence. Soldiers no longer follow a planned sequence of tasks. Instead, they react to immediate threats, leading to confusion within the trench system. Orders become harder to pass on, and small groups act out of instinct rather than coordination. This loss of order spreads quickly, as each position is linked to the next through narrow routes and shared cover. The sudden arrival of UAVs forces Russian infantry into rapid decisions with limited information. Staying in damaged trenches carries the risk of a direct dive strike, while moving out increases visibility from above. Under this pressure, many choose to leave cover and reposition, not because it is safer, but because staying still feels worse. This movement becomes the critical moment where defense turns into exposure. Once soldiers move across open ground, even briefly detection is almost instantaneous. FPV drones track movement patterns rather than fixed positions, and open terrain removes the last layer of camouflage. A running figure stands out clearly against the background, especially when the drone operator is already looking for signs of shifting. The switch from static defense to movement changes the engagement from waiting to hunting, and the Russians become prey. As movement increases, the defensive line begins to thin unevenly. Some positions empty faster than others, creating unplanned gaps. These gaps do not seem dramatic at first, yet they weaken the ability to hold the line as a system. Every abandoned section forces neighboring units to stretch their coverage, increasing stress and accumulating errors during the next wave of pressure. The disruption does not stop at the front line's edge. Supply runs short rotations, and medical evacuations slow down because paths that were safe minutes ago become surveillance zones. Even small adjustments require timing and caution, delaying everything behind the trench. This creates a chain effect where a single drone appearance affects not only the men in view, but also those waiting in the rear. Through strikes during reorganization, FPV drones transform defense into a liability rather than protection. Trenches no longer serve as stable anchors, and movement offers no relief. At this stage, holding ground requires constant vigilance without rest, which is impossible to sustain for long. This moment defines the shift in the fight. Defense ceases to be a shield and becomes a point of exploitation. The line may still exist on the map, but its strength erodes from within, shaped by timing rather than mere force. The expansion of FPV drone targets from infantry to armored support marks a clear escalation in this attack, as it strikes exactly when Russian forces attempt to stabilize the line. When Russian infantry begins to struggle in damaged trenches, armored vehicles are pushed forward to restore control and provide cover. Tanks and infantry fighting vehicles move closer to the line, sometimes stopping near trench systems to support dismounted troops. This action is intended to calm the situation and give the soldiers below a sense of protection, but instead it creates new conspicuous targets that stand out from the air like beacons in the night. Ukrainian FPV teams adapt at lightning speed. Instead of focusing only on soldiers in cover, drones divert to armored vehicles that are moving slowly or pausing to help infantry. Video footage from the sector shows FPVs diving onto tanks and armored carriers that appear stationary or are hindered by terrain. The moment a vehicle slows down or stops, it becomes part of the same death zone as the trench it is supposed to protect. The attacks focus on vulnerable areas critical for function, not just on destruction. FPVs dive onto turrets' engine compartments and side sections where the armor is thinner. A hit in these zones does not always destroy the vehicle completely, but it can paralyze movement, ignite stored fuel, or force the crew to abandon it. Even partial damage changes the tactical picture as a stopped vehicle becomes an obstacle instead of support. While armored vehicles are threatened, their behavior shifts in ways that affect the infantry they are meant to help. Crews hesitate to stay near the line and short retreats replace steady presence. The infantry below notices this shift immediately. The sense of cover vanishes when the engine noise recedes or smoke rises from a damaged vehicle nearby. At this point, the psychological balance tips sharply against the defenders. Infantry pressure draws armored support forward. FP5Es then target this support. Once vehicles pull back or our damaged infantry positions lose their anchor. This chain does not rely on one decisive blow, it relies on the repetition of the same disruption until the system supporting the trench breaks down piece by piece. The presence of FPVs also limits how armored vehicles can react. Rapid movements increase noise and exposure, while standing still invites precise attacks. Crews are forced into short bursts of action followed by retreat, reducing their ability to coordinate with troops on the ground. Communication becomes brief and cautious as every delay increases risk. Over time, this pattern weakens combined actions even without a major ground assault. What stands out in these sequences is how quickly battlefield logic changes once armored vehicles are threatened from above. Tanks are no longer just antidotes to infantry fire or strong points against small arms. They become high-value targets that draw attention and carry risk as soon as they appear near the front. This shifts the cost-benefit analysis for every decision. Since the loss or deactivation of a single vehicle can disrupt an entire local defense, the effect on the infantry is immediate. Soldiers who relied on armored presence to hold exposed sections now face drones without that shield. Movements become more hesitant, and positions that could be held longer begin to empty under pressure. The trench line remains on the map, but its resilience steadily decreases. By expanding FPV attacks to armored support, Ukraine transforms reinforcement into a vulnerability. Vehicles intended to stabilize the fight instead attract precision strikes that deepen the crisis. Once support is threatened, the infantry below remains exposed, and the defensive structure begins to fall apart from the top down rather than from the front. Dear listeners, what do you think about this? Is the Russian army truly so helpless against these celestial hunters? Share your thoughts with us. How would the battlefield change if the Russians finally woke up and countered? Let us know your opinion. Counts in this war of opinions. Real-time UAV coordination breaks the rhythm of Russian attacks by transforming separate strikes into a single mobile pressure that adapts as the fight unfolds. Ukrainian drone teams do not operate in isolation. Reconnaissance UAVs and FPV attack drones share live images and target cues as long as the engagement is in motion. One drone observes movements along the trench line, another follows vehicles approaching from the rear, and FPVs are directed toward the element that exposes itself first. This information flow compresses decision times and removes the lag that defenders rely on to regain control. While Russian infantry reacts to pressure in the trenches, FPVs are directed to force movement rather than wait for it. Drones hover just long enough to signal danger, then dive in as soon as soldiers try to reposition. The situation drives troops out of cover in moments that are already stressful, and these movements are immediately visible to other UAVs in the network. The result is a cycle where reaction creates exposure and exposure invites another strike. Simultaneously, separate FPVs are directed toward armored vehicles moving closer to stabilize the situation. Reconnaissance drones track these vehicles from a distance, observing speed and direction, while attack drones are positioned to intercept as soon as the vehicle slows or pauses. This division of roles allows Ukrainian teams to press both layers of the defense without splitting attention or resources. The key effect of this coordination is disruption rather than destruction. Infantry is pushed out of trenches before armored support can settle in, and vehicles are threatened before they can provide steady cover. No element is allowed to operate at its own pace. Every move triggers a response that arrives faster than traditional ground-based command chains can manage. As these actions repeat, Russian units struggle to synchronize their timing. Infantry hesitates to advance without a nearby tank, while crews hesitate to stay close when FPVs circle above. Communication under this pressure becomes more cautious and fragmented. Orders are shorter, pauses longer, and coordination between units relies more on instinct than planning. Even when no strike lands, the constant presence of UAVs forces commanders to assume that every visible movement has already been seen. This assumption changes behavior along the line as caution replaces initiative. The battlefield effect is clearly seen in how advances stall. A push that begins with infantry movement is slowed by FPVs. An attempt to reinforce with tanks draws attention from above. Each response triggers a counter that arrives while the previous action is still unfolding. The attack does not collapse in one dramatic moment, but it loses form and direction step by step. What makes this coordination dangerous is its flexibility. Ukrainian drone teams do not follow a fixed script. Targets change as the situation changes, and drones are reassigned mid-flight if a better opportunity appears. This keeps Russian forces reacting to the last threat instead of preparing for the next. At this stage, the fight is no longer about individual targets or isolated strikes. It is about attacking the links that allow infantry and tanks to function together. Once these links weaken, the defensive structure becomes unstable, even if individual units remain intact. By coordinating UAVs in real-time, Ukraine transforms the battlefield into a moving puzzle where timing matters more than numbers. The result is a broken rhythm where every attempt to regain control exposes another weakness, and the offensive slows down under pressure from above instead of resistance from the front. FPV firepower reshapes the battle through direct pressure on infantry and vehicle crews as its effects extend beyond damage into every decision made under fire. FPV drones in these strikes carry explosive charges adapted from anti-tank grenades or mortar shells, and this design allows small platforms to threaten much larger systems. A single hit does not have to fully destroy a tank to change the situation. Damage to tracks, engines, optics, or external equipment is often enough to stop movement and force crews to abandon their task. When a vehicle near the front loses mobility, it no longer provides support and instead becomes a problem that must be avoided or recovered under threat. For infantry on the ground, these strikes create immediate disruption casualties in trenches, while the flow of command slows as runners and short movements become risky. Supply tasks that once required brief exposure now demand careful timing, as every movement can draw attention from above. The fight narrows down to what can be done safely in seconds rather than minutes, and that narrows options across the position. The pressure quickly reaches vehicle crews nearby. Tank and armored vehicle operators learn that slowing down for infantry support increases vulnerability. A vehicle that pauses to fire or coordinate becomes easier to track, and FPVs are often directed toward moments of reduced speed. Consequently, crews shorten stops, limiting